Today I am going to be talking about the Windlass Arbedo. Windlass is one of the most popular suppliers of budget medieval swords around. In the US they're sold primarily by their retailer Museum Replicas Limited, although you can find their pieces in just about every reputable retailer, including my go-to, Cult of Athena. Alright, so first, who am I? My name's Kyle, sometimes known as Alientude. I am a geek, a computer nerd, and a sword collecting enthusiast. What I am not is I am not an expert in swordsmanship, in HEMA, in history. I am just an enthusiast, a collector. I tend to prefer medieval swords, but I appreciate just about all hand-to-hand weapons. Katana, warhammer, karambit, I like them all. It's just that medieval swords are my jam. The Windlass Arbedo is a discontinued model. Cult of Athena commissioned a special order of these after the sword was discontinued due to the sword's popularity. This one is from that run, and I bought it secondhand. I believe it was sold originally for around $160. When available on Cult of Athena, this sword would have been listed as unsharpened. The original owner did say that he paid Cult of Athena for their sharpening service. During this review, please keep in mind this sword was bought secondhand. It looks like the previous owner used it to cut, as I see some signs of use, such as scratches and marks. Unfortunately, it also looks like he might not have been quite as fastidious as he could have been with oiling and maintenance, as there seems to be a few light spots of rust. Luckily, I think they'll clean up easily. I'm going to be giving you my thoughts on this specific sword. It might be representative of the entire production run, or it might be an outlier. I can only comment on the one I have. Keep in mind these are the opinions of an amateur. This sword is based on an actual antique that at one point was displayed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Ewart Oakeshott documented it on page 189 of Records of the Medieval Sword as 18A.4. As that number implies, the original was classified by Oakeshott as a type 18A, which is a cut and thrust, all-purpose blade, typically in use from the mid-14th to the early 15th century. Now, I don't believe Windlass designed the sword as a replica, merely inspired by the historical sword. And in my estimation, it does a good job looking like the original. Windlass presumably named the sword after the Battle of Arbedo in 1422. Windlass advertised the sword is made out of 1065 steel. It has a full tang and is peened to the pommel. The pommel and crossguard are made of steel as well, though what type I don't know. The grip is a wood core with a leather wrap and several risers. The overall construction seems pretty good. Windlass can be pretty hit or miss on this, but the Arbedo has a reputation as one of their hits. As you can see, there is some gapping where the blade meets the crossguard, but it's not egregious, especially in this price range. You're not going to get Albion quality on a sub-$200 sword. Okay, let's look at the pommel. It's representative of an Oakeshott Type J, also known as a wheel pommel. It's well formed and the edges are chamfered so it doesn't aggravate the hand. Using the sword with two hands requires gripping the pommel, and I felt no discomfort doing so, which is not always the case with this style. The shape is not quite round. It has a handmade look that I actually appreciate. It's not perfect, but it doesn't need to be. The peen is visible, but I don't see any misplaced hammer marks or much roughness. Overall, it's pretty clean. I tend to favor scent stopper pommels, but this is one of the better wheels I've used. The grip is a wood core and wrapped in leather. Near the crossguard, it's a flattened oval shape, making it comfortable to grip and easy to index the blade. It has a strong taper about halfway through the grip, creating a waisted shape. The risers are well placed and look nice. The transitions from the pommel to the grip and from the grip to the crossguard are done very well, especially for such a low-cost sword. They're clean with a very close fit. This is something considerably more expensive swords often fall down on. I'm very impressed with the attention to detail here. The seam on the leather is similar to the other Windlass swords I've owned. The stitches are prominent, although they're a little softer and less abrasive than my typical experience. The previous owner might have used it enough to soften the stitches. In any case, they didn't bother me when handling the sword. Overall, I really like this grip. It makes handling the sword fun and easy. The crossguard is representative of an Oakeshott Type 8. Like the pommel, the edges are chamfered and don't bite into the hand at all. It has an attractive shape that is thickest at the center ridge and tapers slightly out to the upswept ends of the quillions. As I said earlier, the fit of the blade to the crossguard is not the best. There's some very noticeable gaps between the blade and guard. However, that's completely to be expected at this price point, and I've seen worse on much more expensive blades. The Windlass Arbedo comes with a scabbard, which is not something you can really expect on a budget sword. Good scabbards take a lot of time and effort and often end up costing as much as, if not more than the sword itself. So the fact that you get a scabbard at all is something of a bonus. Sadly, it's just not a very good bonus. I think this is a wood core, but it's just about the thinnest sheet of wood you could find. The whole scabbard feels very flimsy. Even a little pressure on the stitches causes it to bend in the middle in a way that makes it feel like it could break. The leather, or faux leather, I don't know, feels cheap as well. And the sword fits to the scabbard pretty well in that there's not much rattle, but at the same time, there's no retention whatsoever. Actually, the lack of rattle might not be the result of a good fit. Maybe there's almost nothing hard in there for it to rattle against. The worst part about the scabbard, though, is the gunk it leaves on the blade. Every time I draw the sword, there's a lot of white, powdery junk that is left on the blade. I don't know what this stuff is, but I do not like it. There are some positives here, though. The scabbard features a steel shape and collar. I particularly like the collar, as its design follows the same language as the Crossguard, giving it a cohesive look. Overall, though, the scabbard is the first thing about this sword that makes it feel like its price point. Alright, time to talk about the blade. I've put some measurements up on the screen for you to peruse. The cross-section of this sword is a flattened diamond, and it is very flat. It's a thin blade at 3.5 millimeters thick with absolutely no distal taper. I measured the sword after handling it, and I was surprised to see its complete lack of distal taper, as it handles quite well. Normally swords that don't distally taper make me feel like I'm swinging a crowbar, but not the Arbedo. I expect this is caused by a couple factors. First, the overall thickness of the blade. Like I said, at 3.5 millimeters, it's quite thin, which does keep the weight down. Secondly, the profile taper. The blade starts out at 2.5 inches wide at the crossguard, tapering down to a pretty acute point. Third, the pommel is a pretty good size and isn't hollow, so it's acting as a solid counterweight to keep the plane of balance close to the crossguard. The Arbedo has a good amount of flex to it. I can bend it a decent amount, but it's not whippy or overly flexible, unlike some other windlass blades. It springs back to true nicely. Looking down the length of the blade, you can see a lot of ripples on the surface. This isn't an actual problem, as even some Albions will have a degree of rippling, though I wouldn't expect them to have nearly as much as the Arbedo does. As I mentioned earlier, this sword handles quite well. It's a bastard or hand-and-a-half sword, and it truly can be used either way. As a one-handed sword, it's got a good feel to it. Tip control is good, especially if I wrap a finger around the crossguard and rest it against the ricasso. It has good authority on the cut. When wielded in two hands, it feels light and is a joy to swing. The blade length is a little shorter than I tend to prefer for a two-handed sword, but it's a good compromise for a bastard. So, how does it cut? First off, I want to reiterate that I am a novice at swordsmanship. I have no formal training, and I'm well aware my form is poor. I'm greatly looking forward to an end to the pandemic so I can join a local HEMA club and start learning some proper technique. Any failed cuts you see are in all likelihood the fault of the wielder, not the sword. Alright, with those warnings out of the way, I did record myself cutting a couple of pool noodles. These are my targets of choice right now, as I don't feel like my poor skills warrant the expense of tatami mats. I do tend to use water bottles, but right now I'm in the middle of sanding and finishing a new stand for that, so pool noodles it is. Generally speaking, I find I cut better with two-handed swords. I'm able to control the blade better and keep better edge alignment. The Arbedo surprised me by performing pretty much equally one-handed and two. It was a lot of fun cutting with this sword, and I'm glad for that since I picked it up intending it to be one of my budget go-to cutters. Alright, closing thoughts. This is somewhere around the 7th or 8th windlass weapon I've owned, and it's pretty clearly my favorite of the lot. I think it punches considerably above its price range with its agile blade, and especially the fit and finish of the grip. The lack of distal taper, something Windlass is a bit infamous for, doesn't really present a problem with this blade, at least for me. It cuts well, handles well, and is a joy to use. The only real letdown with the sword, well, besides the scabbard, is that it's out of production. Windlass is known for having craploads of models and retiring popular ones, but it's a shame that the Arbedo is only available secondhand. That being said, this sword is proof that discontinued models can be brought back. If enough people contact Cult of Athena and or Windlass asking them to bring back the Arbedo, maybe it'll happen. Anyways, that's going to wrap up this review. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please consider liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching.